Good morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. I'd first like to announce this morning that the lovely and redoubtable Mrs. Busby is not able to be with us this morning, but we're going to carry on forth just like we knew what we were doing. And that's not a given, certainly. Kudos. The boys we had a lot of snow, in case you hadn't noticed that recently, and our city department has done a yeoman's job of trying to do what they can to keep our streets clean. So a tip of the hat to the boys in the city streets crew. By the way, I wonder, this is a question, I give you a $5 breakfast at some place. Does anybody out there remember when we used to plow the sidewalks with a single horse and a V-shaped plow made of 2x12s, and they were popped together, and the horse went down the street, and the man rode the plow, standing behind him with the reins, and I wonder if anybody else can remember that. Nobody else are that old, so. Well, let's get right on to serious business this morning. We have had before as our guest Mr. David Blankenship, local star, and I emphasize that with not being too facetious. You taxpayers want to thank David Blankenship if you see him on the street somewhere. Buy him a beer. You take that. For the yeoman's job he does representing you on our Logan County Board of Trust Supervisors. David's one of those fellows who sees things that need to get done, and he doesn't wring his fingers about it and say, oh dear, what are we going to do? He puts forth his ideas, and if they go through, the county's better off for it. Accompanying him this morning is Mr. Bill Walters, and Bill is a restoration specialist at Masonry, Rehabilitation Technologies and Services, which means you're going to get your courthouse dome fixed. Thank you very much. Bill, we appreciate your being here.
Absolutely.
Bill is an Ohio product. He didn't drive over here this morning from Ohio. He's on the job here every day. And if you wonder what's going on at the courthouse, you look up, they have been trying, and I'll find out in a second here for you, to erect a scaffolding around the entire dome. Last time I looked, they were still at that. So obviously I don't get downtown very much. So Bill, start the question this morning with how far are you in encasing the dome in your scaffolding?
Well, we made significant inroads to get back on the roof and continue the work.
Mind you, listener, the weather has been a little snarky if you hadn't noticed it.
Well,
and it's pretty hard to work up on a roof in a blowing wind, and chill factor is -0.
It is. The men do take precautions. We don't really have a whole lot of trouble with the snow. I mean, yes, that's a relative thing, but it's the ice.
Yeah.
That formulates on the aluminum scaffolding components, and the wind, of course. We did have to do some additional engineering work, and we'll be putting some additional beams in for support. So we've got that taken care of. We had an excellent board meeting last night, and we got several things approved. So we want to go out to the barn, get the saddle, put it back on the horse, and get going again. So we should be making progress here very, very soon. To answer your initial question, my suspicion is we're in the vicinity of 25 to 30% complete with that. So we need to
so the weather's going to get warmer and nicer and make working conditions a little bit better, or a whole lot better.
They promised that.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Are you still on schedule, your schedule, as predicted, subject to the vagaries of weather?
Well, the weather and the pandemic has caused a little inconveniences here and there. Mainly from a scheduling standpoint. There's a lot of preliminary work behind the scenes in terms of developing and putting together the plan of attack and getting all the little stages that are within that plan approved by the board. And again, last night, an excellent meeting. We had a lot of things approved. So it's much like going to the barn on an early spring day and opening the doors and letting the horses out in the paddock. Everybody's going to get going now. I would
Now,
say we're about a month behind.
I think for those of you who have been hiding behind a book, or maybe just hiding, period, don't know what's going on around that courthouse, Mr. Blankenship, let's take it kind of from the start. We have a serious physical problem, and I'll just pass the baton to you to tell us about what we're doing at the courthouse and why we're doing it, sir.
Well, we had several serious problems, from HVAC to electrical insufficiencies. Obviously, the dome, society knew about that for quite some time now. That's been going on for several years. And some other insufficiencies with the plumbing, that type of thing. We needed some pretty significant upgrades if we planned to utilize that facility for years to come. So we just evaluated whether or not we could afford say a law and justice center versus restoration of the courthouse, and all things considered, the pendulum fell toward restoring the courthouse. It was more cost effective, and it was probably more palatable as far as historians would like to see too. So we decided at that point to go for a third referendum. I know many of you are familiar with it. We attempted 2 referendums up front, and then we changed the structure of the third referendum, and then it passed at nearly 66%. So
That was a godsend we got that referendum passed.
it was.
Because
yeah.
we were in a deep hole, and the hole was going to get a lot deeper if we didn't have that referendum to go with us.
True. So right now, in addition to the dome, we've, working with Bill, we've come up with a projected budgetary cost of the different things we'd like to see get accomplished at the courthouse. And obviously, you start off with a wish list and do the best you can. So we're going to try to accomplish as much as we can, as efficiently as we can.
Well, I don't know how many people really accept the architectural beauty of our Logan County Courthouse. The state of Illinois has a lot of historical courthouses, particularly down south, but we are, my opinion only, we're very fortunate to have that building here on the square. It could have been just a frame old house that they put up down there years ago. And how old is that building now, David?
I believe it was built in 1905. Is that
1905, yeah. Well, Mr. Walters, the scope of your work is real significant. Bottom line is, when you get done, we're going to have a weather-tight building. And I mentioned weather-tight with specificity. Did I say that?
Very good.
And anyway, we were doomed to have a building that failed. And that would have been a real tragedy for the county.
It was, and it was progressing towards that, and normally in this business, what takes a long time to begin as far as deterioration quickly takes off, because the more you have, the faster it goes. Mm-hmm. And David was right on the spot as far as timing, getting a lot of these things looked at and put into the plan to be taken care of. It is, as you say, one of the most beautiful buildings in the state. And yes, when we're done, we expect it to be not only weather tight, but with the implementation of the new HVAC system and the controls that go along with it, we expect it to be comfortable for the people that occupy those spaces, for the general public that comes in, and for anybody that comes off the historic Route 66 and wants to see one of the better buildings of that era having been put back together again. And what we're doing is not only intended to bring back its glory, but to maintain it and preserve it in that condition for years to come. So the weather tightness, the thermal controls, etc., will all lend itself to that happening.
Well, you know that some people say, well, just tear it down. Well, you know, kind of off the cuff comment. Well, that's pretty stupid to really think about it. Number one, they're just the logistics of how our county office is going to function while all this is going on. Yeah. You're going to take the treasurer's office and stick it in the old Woolworth building? No, thank you. So in any event, the bottom line is, through David's, I think his quick thinking is the way I'm going to phrase that, Bill.
Yes.
And seeing the nature of the problem, knowing that we couldn't just sit there and twiddle our fingers and say, oh dear, what are we going to do?
Exactly.
So the county board wisely took some action. And were you the guy who found Mr. Walter's firm, David?
That's correct, yes.
Well, a salute to you. Put on the television camera so I can salute you, sir, Mr. Ash.
Appreciate it.
We're happy to have this firm because we feel that when it's done, we're going to walk out of there with a prize package and save our courthouse. And I think that's very, very important, really important. Number one, you mentioned the environment in which our people work there in the county courthouse. Having air conditioning hanging out the windows with water dripping everywhere, and that's not going to be the case anymore.
That's correct. That's correct. It was a necessary evil, if you will. It was sure better than nothing, but not by much.
Yeah.
There's some inadequacies and insufficiencies with that kind of system, and David is the perfect individual to have in that particular position because his expertise in the field of electric systems and computers and such lends itself to know what it needs to be brought up to speed and how that particular courthouse needs to have things specifically tailored to fit and become the most efficient machine that we can get.
Speaking of efficiency, every week, Mrs. Busby and I sit here and we open up interview Viewpoint, and we've about 15 minutes into the program, and I say, oh, we do have sponsors. So maybe we better take some time to recognize them right away, Mr. Ash. Right back live in the studios here this morning, WLCN 96.3 on your dial. The program, of course, is Viewpoint, appearing each Wednesday morning at 8:15 to 0900 hours. Our guests this morning, two special guys. We've had them on before. Bill Walters, a restoration specialist at Masonry Rehabilitation, can't even say rehab, Rehabilitation Services. Bill comes to us out of Ohio, and thank goodness Mr. Blankenship found this firm. Our guest this morning, Mr. David Blankenship, local boy, comes right out here of Atlanta. You've seen him run around here with a snotty nose and what he was a little kid. So we're happy to. Dave has been on our county board. How long now, sir?
7
on the county
years.
board?
7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you something. I'm not trying to stroke you in front of God and everybody, but the county's lucky we have a David Blankenship on the board. Am I not right there?
You are totally correct. Yeah. You are totally correct.
The subject this morning, of course, is the restoration of our Logan County Courthouse. Thanks to the forethinking of taxpayers, we passed a referendum some time ago, and by doing so, you've saved your courthouse, ladies and gentlemen. The courthouse is under a major renovation, the first part of which was seal the doggone thing so it won't leak. And that's what kind of tipped the whole thing off. We had, coming out of the beautiful dome, we had things dropping, and that kind of alerted us, oh, we got a problem here. And so Mr. Blankenship and the Logan County Board of Supervisors were smart enough to realize we got to do something about this. We can't wring our hands. So research and a lot of thought went into bringing in Mr. Walter's firm, and they have been in the process of trying to tighten that rascal up. And I just asked off air, I asked Mr. Walters if they would be done in, like say, July 1, and he said yes. 2022, which was an eye-opener for the old Bill here. So let's explain that, Mr. Walters. We're not just coming up there and putting putty on the leaks.
That is well said. That is well said. When David first contacted me, it of course was because of the dome, as you pointed out. And once we got into the dome, things started to unravel in terms of the condition of the balance of the building and some of the almost equally serious needs that were present there. So we formulated a good, solid list of items that were required. It wasn't...
All of which took a lot of money.
and it still will take a lot of money. And with that list, David went to the public and said, we need to have these things done, and put together an amazing presentation and explained in great detail to the people that were interested why we needed this and what had to be done, and this is how much it's going to cost. And like Dave said earlier today, the referendum passed with an amazing 66% plus or minus. From that, then the project itself is being evolved, the specifications, the engineering, et cetera, putting all of these things together. And to your original question as to how long will this take, the dome we anticipate to be done in 2021 without a problem. The balance of the building, much of it will run concomitantly with that dome restoration. The HVAC will probably all by itself take as long as the dome and then some. All of the other accoutramental procedures will be done as well. And we expect somewhere between 18 and 20 months, maybe 22 months. We want the job done right, not necessarily fast. But in that vein, we look at 20 months plus or minus of actual construction time.
So when you had the patient on the examining board and got to examining things, you found a really sick patient.
Incredibly sick. Still with a pulse.
That's a good way to put it.
Just barely, but David had the stethoscope out and was feeling in various different locations in the building. We were talking just a moment ago as far as the boiler system was concerned. I know that significant inroads have been made to repair them in spite of what has happened in previous times, so that this winter, what we're into right now, we would have heat inside the building, consistent heat. A lot of the past seasons, you've been limping along, barely being able to go from one breakdown event to another, and still provide some level of comfort for the people that work in there. David, again, right man in the right position, knew of a more formidable contractor out of Peoria that came down and just between the two of them, they got their magic wands out and started making repairs at a pretty reasonable price when you consider that the cost that would have had to been made with a temporary heating system would have been upwards of $130,000, $140,000.
And then that was, you said temporary.
That was temporary, yes.
Yeah.
But the repairs were made for, I think, was less than $15,000, and made the system, I'm going to say something, like brand new. Of course, it's not, but so far it has run consistently. It has run the way it is supposed to. Everything's checking out just fine.
Well, listeners will recall, hopefully, that I have said on many occasions, we have a great group of people who work in our courthouse.
Yes.
And it's nice to know that their working environment is going to be a lot more comfortable for them now, both winter and summer.
Absolutely. And it does wonders as far as people a lot of times don't take into consideration that how we control the climate inside also affects the physical property itself. You've got magnificent wood in that building. You've got magnificent marble, ceramic tile floors, etc. All of those suffer if you have exaggerated movement in your humidity, exaggerated movement in your temperature. So by being able to control all aspects of the climate, as we say, the physical properties will gain significant benefit as well.
Well, I see Joe and Josephine Smith as they walk by going to get a cup of coffee somewhere on the square. They don't give one thought to that at all. There is that nice building, and nobody ever thinks about how we acquired it, and more importantly, how are we going to keep it? And that's what we're involved in now. Now, physically, you've had to erect scaffolding around our dome. that in and of itself, just erecting the scaffolding has got to be a major job. It's what they do after the scaffolding is up, though, that counts.
Well, many times that's what's involved with a building, of any building with size. It is often a large question mark. It is a challenge to get to the location that you need to make the repairs. When you built the building in 1905, you didn't give it any thought as to, well, in 100 years, how are the people going to get to this dome to make repairs?
Yeah.
So that, like you said so well, in it unto itself is a challenge. And sometimes the cost of getting to might even supersede the actual cost of repair. In this particular case, it doesn't, but it is formidable. It is formidable as far as design. You have to take into consideration that this is going to be encapsulated when done. So we can work in inclement weather, but just as important in the summertime, remember, we're going to be taking that dome apart and putting it back together again. If you get a rain shower, you want to have your umbrella up. Otherwise, the inside is going to be inundated with water. So it's just as important during what is perceived to be good climate as it is in the bad climate. So all those have to be taken into consideration, and we do.
648-5510. Our guest this morning on Viewpoint, Mr. David Blankenship. As I say often, and with some fun about it, a local boy. We're tickled to death David's on our County Board of Supervisors, and through his auspices and smarts, he and the County Board have been able to bring Mr. Bill Walters in here, and Bill represents Masonry, Rehabilitation, Technology, and Services. I can't hardly say that.
Why don't we say Masonry Restoration, and that might make it easier.
Yeah, right. All right. Restoration Technologies.
There you go.
That's easier to say than rehab.
There you go.
Now, listen, ladies and gentlemen, both of you out there, pay strict attention. Got a lot going on down there in the courthouse square. And you might have some questions, and they'd be valid questions. There are no dumb questions. If you have any questions and/or comments, we would be happy to entertain a call. 648-5510. I really am impressed with the thoroughness that has been exhibited throughout this whole project. Nobody wasn't a wringing of hands about, what are we going to do? The County Board of Supervisors saw fit that they had to do something, and we can't sit here and worry about it. And so they did, thanks to some little pushing. And the Logan County taxpayers agreed with them. And thank you, taxpayers, for allowing us to save this architectural wonder. And as an aside, besides being an architectural wonder, it's the efficiency of getting things done in the county. We would have been a really sore mess if we had not seen fit to proceed with this insofar as running the business of the county is concerned.
Exactly.
I would hate to see Mark Landers and his sheriff's department have to go out there on the side of town in a lean-to somewhere and try to conduct business.
Yes.
The same through as well our county treasurer. They make sure that their money's spent right. They do a pretty doggone good job of that, thanks to the County Board of Supervisors. But they need to have a place to work. And you can't use a card table and a couple of boxes for filing.
No, and you would like to have a decent and respectable and efficiently laid out location for the general public to come in and transact their business. It is one thing to have the people that perform those operations in a situation that's inconvenient, uncomfortable, etc., but then to take the general public who doesn't know, is not familiar with how things are and how things are supposed to be, come into a disorientated situation. Yeah. To have them be comfortable and have them be in a situation that is well organized, well laid out, and comfortable is just as important as the occupants and employees.
You know, Mr. Walters, a question that occurs to me here, a thought, not the question, a thought that occurs to me. We had to erect this tent, for want of a better word, over the dome so you could work in the weather.
Yes.
Now we're about through with the winter months, thank goodness, and we're going to go into the heat of mid-July and we've got men working under that dome, under that tent. And we've had to put that up there because we can't open it up to possible rains, inevitable rains, not possible.
Sure.
So it's going to be pretty hot up there underneath it. So working conditions are not going to be all that pleasant.
Well, that's a relative thing. Most of the guys that will be brought onto, and women that will be brought onto the site to perform the work, will tell you, whether you ask them or not, that they've been involved with some very extreme conditions. It is almost a badge of honor to have been in a situation like that and made your job such that you performed it and everything came out well. The second thing, in more direct response to what you say, this is not going to be a monolithic cover. This will have the ability for ventilation openings to be opened during the work period. And as you know from a chimney effect, it will actually draw in cooler air and it will rise and go out the top. So there'll be a modicum of circulation. No, it's not going to be air conditioned, but it will be reasonably fresh when you compare it to something that is airtight with no air movement at all. We'll make sure of that.
Kind of reminds me, David, of the story about the two campers were out and woke up one morning, look at the gorgeous stars, and the guy said to the other guy, says, boy, look at that, isn't that what does that make you think? Well, he says, it makes me think somebody stole her tent, you idiot.
So, something like that. Yes.
Enough attempt at levity for this morning because we have a very serious subject matter. You mentioned, Mr. Walters, a time limit that I didn't even begin to think about, that you're going into 2022. I find that very interesting. And so the average person might ask, average person you may call in anytime you want, 648-5510, you might ask, why is it taking so long?
It is a process. It is a process that is many times dependent on one operation being completed before another operation can start. There is some synergy in doing many things at the same time. There are some inconveniences. Joe is occupying this space, therefore Fred can't occupy the same space. So you have to wait in logical turn in order to perform your operation. There are some things, as I said before, that quite literally have to be absolutely complete before you can start this process. Case in point, the restoration of your ceramic floor. You don't necessarily want to do that first and then have everybody from all the other trades come in and trample on it and possibly scar it, scuff it, etc. So that's going to wait a little bit towards the back end of the project. Let all the other operations take place first. There are some systematic procedures that have to be done first. You have to experience an upgrade in your electric and plumbing, and most assuredly that has to be done before you start engaging in installing the new HVAC system. One can't operate, well, in this particular case, you don't want to put the HVAC system in without having the necessary electric to supply it and operate it. So things have logical progression. Everything takes time, and it never takes as little time as you hope it would. It takes just the right amount of time to get the job done right. And in this particular case, we're broadcasting something around 20-22 months. We're comfortable with that. We think that everything can be done and done properly in that time period.
So you're like the conductor in front of a symphonic orchestra.
My mother would like to hear that.
You're bringing in the violins when you want them to come in with the touch of your wand, and you're bringing in the brass when you want them to come in.
If I thought I could get the response from all the contractors like the conductor does with his orchestra mates, that would be fantastic.
Mr. Blankenship, from the county board standpoint, how do you see things going, sir?
Right now, I'm pleased. I'm with Bill. I believe we may be slightly behind schedule with regards to engineering, just a little bit as a result of what we encountered with the dome, but I think we can easily overcome that.
Absolutely.
I don't see that being a problem. I think the general public needs to realize, too, I know everybody's excited and they want to see a lot of activity, and they will in time, but there's a lot of planning and a lot of engineering that goes behind any type of project like this. So I would just encourage people to be patient. At some point in time, you're going to see a lot of activity. Right now, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes.
Well, the preliminaries, for instance, just putting up the scaffolding alongside the building to bring up the scaffolding to encapsulate the dome.
Yeah.
That was a major deal.
Yeah.
That's correct, yeah.
There's a lot of things from a logistics standpoint that enter into it. Obviously, the security, well run at the courthouse.
Yes.
Needs to be.
And by the way, not only well run, but done in a civil way.
Absolutely.
We've all known cases where officers, they're people.
Yeah.
And they can have a bad day.
Sure.
I've never run into a bad day when I went into the courthouse. I've always found them very solicitous and very courteous.
They treat you with respect. And we want to reciprocate that by letting them be involved. Okay, today we need to occupy this portion of the courthouse, or we need to have this entrance blocked, or we need to occupy this sidewalk because we're bringing a crane in to bring some components up to the roof. They in turn have to coordinate it with their own people, with the occupants inside the courthouse, so that everybody's aware from a safety standpoint. Most assuredly, that's first and foremost.
And logistically, that's a problem. For instance, now we all go into the east door of the courthouse.
Right.
If you had to substitute and push around to the opposite, to the west side, just moving all of that equipment around.
Sure, and we've had to do that twice, I think. And they did it as if there was no problem
Seamless.
at all. Mm-hmm. Very, very well done, very nicely done. But those things, it is, as Dave said, it's an act of coordination and respect for all the different entities that are in the project. You have one bad apple and it can upset the flow of the project. And so far, you have made that comment several times. You have great people. And it makes my job so much better.
From the janitorial staff to the office holders, the main office holders.
Absolutely.
We do have a number of great people up there.
Yeah.
And when you walk into any office up there, you're going to be received in a courteous manner.
Sure. Even the judges are wonderful. They have one of the hardest jobs in the courthouse as far as their sensitivity towards noise, inconveniences, etc. And they have just been fantastic. I think they have a good grip on what has to be done, and it is to their betterment that it's going to be done, and they appreciate that, and it's just been totally cooperative.
It's nice to work with people who know the realities of life.
Totally.
As opposed to their own theory about things. Which reminds me, David, it seems to me that your county board took a grip on that, the realities of life insofar as our courthouse life is concerned. And had the board not responded in a positive manner, in which they did, thanks to the taxpayers, in a few years we'd have had a derelict there. Am I correct in that?
Yes, and we did some feasibility studies. Dave was actually championing this cause. It became very important, especially when you were talking to the people during the referendum. What if we didn't do this? Mm-hmm. How much would it cost to put up a similar facility? How much would it cost to abandon this facility? People don't appreciate the fact that you just don't walk away from it. There are costs involved. There are procedures involved that must be done. And Dave calibrated all of this and brought it to the attention of the taxpayers in a logical manner. It wasn't like it was dictatorial and he said, this is it. No, don't ask any questions. These are the facts. That's it. It was presented in a logical fashion so that people can understand it. And I don't doubt for a minute that lent itself to the passing to a large degree. Obviously, I think the overall presentation educated the people to a point where it just made sense. But then to understand what happens if we don't do this, I think is equally important.
Is there an immediate problem about which you have some concern right now, Mr. Walters?
Well, I think the two things that well, three,
David
four,
is
five,
shaking his head and
six
grinning.
things. You can keep
I
going,
think I
and it's
know
like a
one.
snowball. The dome, obviously, the HVAC system, obviously. So many things.
Those are major problems. They're not insignificant.
They're major problems, and you even start then looking at the systems that are in the courthouse that supply, when I mean the plumbing, the electric, and when you start asking it to do things that it was never intended to do. You know, keep in mind that the electric came in at a time where there were no computers, there was no air conditioners, you know, there was no heavy draw on the system. So the system that was there, that is there, is, I think it's safe to say, totally inadequate. So we keep asking it to do all these things, and it keeps Dave busy as an electrician and verbose in that field. He knows that we're just biding our time before something devastating happens, like a complete shutdown. So when you say there are certain things that are critical, there are certain things that were imminent as far as coming apart, you can almost look from top to bottom and say every single system in this building needs attention.
Well, taxpayers, you're talking about your home down on the courthouse square, 648-5510. If anybody has any questions at all, feel free to dial in. Mr. David Blankenship and Bill Walters are here giving us their time. Again, we appreciate you taking your time. I know you both got things to do. David, you say you had a good board meeting last night. Is that the county board meeting? Did you
That's
met as a
correct.
whole?
Yes.
Any unusual problems that you can divulge, or?
No, I don't think so. We've got this structured right now where we have a technical committee that undertakes a lot of the planning, engineering costs, that type of thing. They don't actually draw up the plans, but we go through them meticulously with Mr. Walter, and that helps a lot in this process, and it makes the board more efficient, causes us to move forward more rapidly, and that's basically where we're at right now. We meet, then it goes to the Building Grounds Committee, and then on to the board. So by the time it reaches the board, it's been through several hands, so to speak. A lot of good, strong minds have looked at it, and it's alleviates a lot of the stress the board would encounter if they had to do all this themselves. So things tend to move through the board rather efficiently. In saying that, though, it's not without questions, and and a lot of good concerns come up, and we kind of formulate our direction up to the end. Actually, we've received great ideas from the public and fellow board members and past board members, and it takes a whole group of people to make this come to pass. So even though we've established a plan, we've altered them, and we probably will continue to do so. But last night was pretty good board meeting. Things moved right along, and with the workshop meeting taking place prior to the adjourned board, that's very helpful too, because we get a lot of our conversation accomplished during the workshop meeting. It's a non-voting session.
This is your taxpayers' employees, which is a decent way to put it, I think. Your taxpayers' employees at work, and they're at work in solving a serious problem, which if they had sat there and wrung their hands about it down the road, and in a very short time, Mr. Walter's going to say this is right or wrong, but it seems to me we've had a serious deterioration problem.
Absolutely.
We were having, present tense, we were having a serious deterioration problem.
Yes, and I can take just a second and echo what Dave is saying. There are a tremendous number of board members, and they all work diligently and hard, obviously with the thought in mind that they not only represent themselves, but they represent all of Logan County. And they want to make sure that when we're done, they have a facility that everybody agrees with. And that's all part of the process. You argue, you discuss, you lay things out on the table, you explain things so that it becomes everybody's project and everybody's involved. And when we're done, there's nobody unhappy, there's nobody that doesn't understand. It's a nice, smooth situation.
David, any unseen Well, that's a stupid question. I withdraws the question. As Amos Andy used to say, I withdraws the question. What I started to ask is about possible unseen problems that are looming on the surface, but how in the world are we going to know about unseen problems?
Well, Bill, once we get started, and especially with the interior, I think we're going to come across numerous unforeseen problems. That's just the nature of restoration, and I think we'll encounter several of those. We'll overcome them.
Yes, yeah, the ability of the board to, as the Marines say, adapt, improvise, and overcome is substantial.
We have a magnificent third-floor courtroom, probably unusual in the 102 counties that we have here in the state of Illinois. Is that going to be restored to its original beauty, so to say?
That is our fervent intention, to give that one more of a historical approach, to return everything that we possibly can to its original state with the inclusion of modern day technology, obviously from a security standpoint, a communication standpoint, and just the well-being of the judge, jury, and all the participants. We're going to make that almost invisible. It will be there, but it's going to blend into the character and the architecture of that third floor courtroom. We want to keep that as historic as we can.
You could see the beauty of the dome in past years.
Yes.
Is that going to be the same thing? We will be able to see that beauty once you're all done and out of there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's probably the most visual component of this entire project. You will see that 8, 9, 10 miles away. And as you get closer, it's going to continue to magnify itself as you get closer, both from an external standpoint and an interior standpoint.
Yeah, from the interior, I recall you kind of being awed the first time I saw it, looked up there, and I was,
Yes.
hell, I was a kid then.
Yeah.
Probably 11, 12 years old and a Boy Scout. Well, I certainly wasn't 10 or 11 because you had to be 12 to be a Boy Scout. But in any event, I recall my first time going in there, and it was kind of an awe-inspiring sight, and it would have been a shame to have. And we were going to lose that. We were in the process of losing that. Am I not correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that I'll bring up, again, borrowing on Dave's expertise, the interior, the stained glass dome that resides above the third floor, Dave has brought to the foreground the ability and his desire to see that amplified with LED light systems so that everybody can see it at its maximum appearance. It's going to have the background lighting.
Lighting, yeah.
Make it look beautiful.
Mr. Blankenship, we just got a couple of seconds left here. Would you like to try to sum this morning up in your own expertise?
Well, I would have to say patience. That would be that would be the word of the day. Is just urge the public to be patient. It's underway. We may have some encumbrances now and then, but we'll get through them. And that's all I can say is let's just be patient. Let's work together. Let's put our energies and our efforts for one cause, and let's get this thing accomplished.
For you local people, you don't know Mr. Walters because he comes to the great state of Ohio, where they have funnier politicians than we do. But you know, Mr. Blankenship, if you see him around the courthouse square, anywhere in Mama's or anywhere else, thank him for his dedication. I won't say expertise, I'll let him define that. But for his dedication, takes a lot of thought and a lot of work to be a public servant. So on behalf of Viewpoint, David Blankenship, we thank you very much. Bill Walters, we thank you for taking your time to be with us this morning.
Absolutely.
Thank you for Viewpoint.